Fear gripped Felicity Woodrow's heart as the stagecoach rattled to a stop. This was it. Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, 1876. The sun bled across the horizon, casting shadows that looked like long skeletal fingers reaching across the barren land. This was her wedding night, a wedding to a man she'd never met. His name was Edmund Blackwell, a wealthy mine owner. He had purchased her, plain and simple, through a mail-order bride arrangement her father had set up right before he died. A final desperate act to settle a lifetime of gambling debts. "End of the line, miss," the driver called out, his voice rough as the road they'd just traveled. "Silver Creek." Felicity gathered her single, worn carpet bag. It held everything she had left from her life in Boston. She was 22 years old, and she had accepted her fate. She was property, being transferred from a dead man's debt to a live man's ledger. She stepped down into the dust. It swirled around her ankles, instantly clinging to her travel-worn skirts. The town wasn't much, a handful of wooden buildings lining a single main street, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel. No one was there to meet her. The silence was heavier than the desert heat. "Mr. Blackwell send someone for you?" the driver asked, handing down her bag. "He was supposed to," Felicity replied, her voice small. The sun was sinking fast, and a chill that had nothing to do with the air was creeping up her spine. "Well, I can't wait around. Got a schedule to keep." The driver tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, miss." Before she could say another word, the stagecoach was rolling away, its wheels kicking up a cloud of dust that left her choking and utterly alone. What now? The thought barely had time to form before the batwing doors of the saloon swung open. 3 men stumbled out, their loud, drunken laughter dying on their lips the moment they saw her. "Well, look what we got here," the tallest one slurred, nudging his friends. "Fresh meat." Felicity clutched her bag tighter. She took a step back, her heel hitting the rough wood of the general store. They moved toward her, their intentions written plain as day in their leering grins. "You lost, pretty lady?" one of them asked. His breath smelled of cheap whiskey and rot. "I'm waiting for Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to keep it steady. The men looked at each other, and a cruel smirk spread across the leader's face. He let out a harsh laugh. "Blackwell? Edmund Blackwell?" "Yes," she said, a flicker of hope in her chest. "Do you know him?" "Oh, we know him, all right," the man said, taking another step closer. He was almost on top of her now. "Blackwell's dead, sweetheart. Been dead 3 weeks. Mining accident." The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, and the dusty streets seemed to blur. That can't be true." "True as I'm standing here," the man said, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. His grip was like iron. "But don't you worry. We can take real good care of you." Panic, cold and sharp, rose in her throat. She tried to pull away, but he held fast. This wasn't happening. It couldn't end like this. Just as the other 2 men closed in, a deep voice cut through the evening air like a razor. "I believe the lady isn't interested in your company, gentlemen." Everyone froze. The men turned, and Felicity peered around them. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the dying sun, a long shadow stretching out before him. He stepped forward, and his features came into focus. A strong jaw, weathered skin, and eyes that seemed to burn with an intensity that defied the fading light. He wore a long duster coat and a worn Stetson hat. At his hip, a Colt revolver rested in its holster. He looked like he was carved from the desert itself. "This ain't your business, Lawson," the leader of the drunks spat, though his voice had lost its bravado. "I'm making it my business," the stranger Lawson replied. His voice was calm, but it held an unmistakable edge of command. His hand rested near the butt of his gun, a casual posture that was anything but. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The air crackled with the promise of violence. Then the leader cursed under his breath, spat in the dust, and let go of Felicity's arm. "Come on, boys," he grumbled to his friends. "Ain't worth the trouble." As they stumbled back into the saloon, Felicity let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her legs felt like they might give out. The stranger Lawson approached her slowly, as if not to spook a frightened animal. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Yes. Thank you," she managed to say, though she was still trembling. Is it true? What they said about Mr. Blackwell?" A shadow passed over Lawson's face. "I'm afraid so. Edmund Blackwell died in a cave-in at his mine 3 weeks ago." The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. Her entire future, the grim plan she had resigned herself to, had just evaporated. She was stranded. No money, no connections, and night was falling fast on a town that had already shown its teeth. "I'm Lucas Lawson," the man said. "Town marshal here in Silver Creek." "Felicity Woodrow," she replied automatically. I came here to marry Mr. Blackwell." "You're not the first mail-order bride to arrive for a man who's already gone," he said, his expression softening with something that looked like pity. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." Felicity fought back the tears that threatened to spill over. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this man. "Is there a hotel?" she asked, her voice tight. "A place I might stay for the night?" Lucas nodded. "Silver Creek Inn, just down the street." He hesitated for a moment. "Do you have funds for a room?" The question stung, but it was a fair one. She had spent almost every last cent on the journey here. "I have some," she said, knowing it wouldn't last more than a single night. Lucas seemed to see right through her. He looked at her worn dress, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide in her eyes. "Come with me," he said. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house has a spare room. She's a good woman. Might be willing to work something out with you." With no other options, Felicity nodded and followed the marshal down the dusty street. She watched him as they walked. He had a purposeful stride, his broad shoulders filling out his duster coat. His brown hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He looked strong, capable, a man who could handle himself. But as they walked, one of the drunks who had accosted her stumbled out of the saloon again. He saw her with the marshal and quickly ducked back inside. But not before his eyes met hers for a split second. And in that look, she saw something that made her blood run cold. It wasn't malice. It was fear. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid for her. And he was terrified of the man walking right beside her. She tried to push the unsettling feeling away. It had to be a trick of the light, the whiskey in his eyes. Why would anyone be afraid of the town marshal, the man who had just saved her? It didn't make any sense. "Town's grown some since the silver mine opened," Lucas was saying, breaking into her thoughts. "Blackwell's mine," she stated, more than asked. "That's the one," Lucas confirmed. "Biggest employer in these parts. He was building an empire." "What will happen to it now?" Felicity asked, a strange new curiosity taking root. "His foreman's running things for now. Blackwell had no family that anyone knows of. Lawyers are coming from Tucson next month to sort it all out." He glanced at her, his gaze sharp. "Did you have much correspondence with him? Letters?" "Very few," Felicity admitted. The truth was, she had only one letter from Blackwell himself, a short, formal note confirming the arrangement. The rest had been through the agency. "My father handled the details." She let her voice trail off, not wanting to share the shame of her family's ruin. They arrived at a neat 2-story house with a sign that read, "Peterson Boarding House." Lucas knocked, and the door was opened by a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Evening, Marshal," she said before her eyes landed on Felicity. "And who is this?" Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Felicity Woodrow. She arrived on today's stage. She was expecting to marry Edmund Blackwell." The woman's smile vanished, replaced by a look of deep sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in. Come in out of the dust." Inside, the boarding house smelled of fresh bread and beeswax. It was clean and modest, a stark contrast to the rough exterior of the town. While Mrs. Peterson bustled around making tea, Lucas explained Felicity's situation. "Of course she can stay," Mrs. Peterson declared without a moment's hesitation. "I've got the back room empty. She can stay as long as she needs." "I can only pay for a night or two," Felicity confessed, her cheeks flushing. "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. "We'll work something out. You can help me with the cooking and cleaning. My old bones aren't what they used to be." Relief washed over Felicity so intensely she felt dizzy. "I would be happy to help in any way I can. Thank you." "It's settled then," Lucas said, rising from his chair. He put on his hat. "Miss Woodrow, I'll check in on you tomorrow. We'll figure something out." As he turned to leave, Felicity stood up. "Thank you, Marshal Lawson. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." He turned back, and in the dim lamplight his eyes seemed to hold a strange mix of concern and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Get some rest. Things will look better in the morning." But as he walked out the door, Felicity couldn't shake the image of the drunk's fearful eyes. Was Lucas Lawson her savior, or was he something else entirely? The thought was absurd, but it lingered, a cold spot in the warmth of Mrs. Peterson's cozy home. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the drunk, his eyes wide with terror. It was a warning. She was sure of it. But a warning about what? The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in her only other presentable dress and went downstairs. Mrs. Peterson was in the kitchen, a cheerful whirlwind of activity. "Good morning, dear," she chirped. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Felicity lied. Over a plate of eggs, she asked what kind of work might be available for a woman in Silver Creek. "Well, there's the saloon, but that's no place for a respectable girl," Mrs. Peterson said, shaking her head. "The general store might need help. Or maybe Dr. Wilson. He's always complaining about his paperwork." Just then, a knock came at the door. It was Lucas. He took off his hat as he stepped inside, his eyes finding Felicity immediately. "Morning, Miss Woodrow. Thought I'd see how you're settling in." "As well as can be expected, Marshal," she replied, her voice more formal than she intended. Mrs. Peterson, ever the matchmaker, quickly excused herself to tend to a pie in the oven, leaving them alone. Lucas sat down across from her at the small dining table. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, his voice low and serious. "I sent a telegraph to the county seat last night. There might be some legal matters to sort out regarding Blackwell's estate." Felicity frowned. "I don't understand. We weren't married." "No, but there was a contract, I assume. You came all this way based on that contract. Blackwell may have made some provision for you." He was watching her intently, as if trying to read her mind. "The papers are in my bag," she said slowly. "Might be worth having a lawyer look at them," he suggested. "If Blackwell paid for your passage, there might be some form of compensation due." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Woodrow, Felicity, forgive me for asking, but was this arrangement something you wanted?" The question caught her off guard. "It was a practical solution to a difficult problem," she said evasively. "Love is a luxury not everyone can afford, Marshal." A shadow crossed his face. "That may be, but it doesn't seem right." "What doesn't seem right is finding myself stranded and penniless," she countered, a bit more sharply than she intended. To her surprise, a slow smile spread across his face. "You've got spirit, Miss Woodrow. That'll serve you well out here." He stood to leave. "I need to make my rounds. But I spoke to Dr. Wilson this morning. He said he could use someone to help with his books. He's expecting you." It was a lifeline, and he had handed it to her. She should have been purely grateful. But instead, a knot of suspicion tightened in her stomach. He was helping her. He was being kind, thoughtful, and protective. It was all perfect. A little too perfect. He was solving all of her problems, making himself indispensable. And as he walked away, she realized that in less than 24 hours, she had become completely dependent on a man she didn't know, in a town full of secrets, under the shadow of a dead man's legacy. Her rescuer was weaving a web around her, and she wasn't sure if it was for her protection or for his own purposes. Felicity went to see Dr. Wilson that morning. The doctor was a kind, balding man in his 50s, with spectacles perched on his nose and a gentle manner that should have put her at ease. His office was a chaotic mess of papers, books, and medical instruments. "Marshal Lawson speaks very highly of you, Miss Woodrow," he said, peering at her over his glasses. "Says you're educated and have a good head for numbers." "I do my best, doctor," she replied, forcing a smile. He hired her on the spot. The pay was meager, but it was enough to cover her room and board at Mrs. Peterson's, with a little left over. It was independence, or at least the beginning of it. She spent the day turning the doctor's chaos into order, creating a filing system and a ledger for his patients. The work was methodical and soothing, a welcome distraction from the turmoil in her mind. But as she sorted through a stack of old invoices, she found something that made her pause. It was a bill for medical services rendered to Mr. Edmund Blackwell, dated the day of the mine collapse. The details were sparse, but the diagnosis was clear. Blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall. But there was another line, hastily scribbled at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. Also noted, defensive wounds on hands and forearms. Defensive wounds. That didn't sound like an accident. A cave-in was random, chaotic. It crushed. It didn't brawl. Defensive wounds meant a fight, a struggle. It meant that Edmund Blackwell hadn't just died in his mine. He had been fighting for his life. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Lucas had told her it was a cave-in. The whole town believed it was a cave-in. But this piece of paper told a different story. It whispered of violence, of murder. And if Blackwell was murdered, then the question wasn't just what happened. It was who did it. And why had the town marshal, the man in charge of investigating such things, so readily accepted the story of an accident? The office door opened, and Lucas stood there, a friendly smile on his face. "I see you've already worked wonders," he said, gesturing to the newly organized office. Felicity's heart hammered against her ribs. She quickly covered the invoice with another stack of papers, her hands trembling slightly. "Dr. Wilson's records were thorough," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her. "He was singing your praises when I saw him earlier," Lucas said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I came to ask if you'd do me the honor of having dinner with me tonight, at the hotel, just a friendly meal to welcome you to town properly." Her mind was screaming no. Every instinct told her to run, to put as much distance as possible between herself and this man. But her mouth said, "That would be lovely, thank you." She had to know more. She had to understand what was happening in this town. And the only way to do that was to get closer to the man who was at the very center of it all. The man who was either her protector or a very clever predator. That night she wore her last good dress, a forest green silk that felt out of place in the dusty town. Lucas arrived looking every bit the gentleman, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He was handsome, charming, and as he led her to the hotel restaurant, the townspeople watched them with open approval, the marshal and the new school teacher. It was a story they all understood. During dinner, Lucas was the perfect companion. He told her stories about the town, about his life, about his hopes for Silver Creek's future. He spoke of his past, of fighting in the war, of a wife named Lillian who had died of fever years ago. It was a tragic, compelling story, and Felicity found herself wondering if any of it was true. "You seem troubled," he said, his voice laced with concern as he reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and steady. "Is everything all right?" "It's just been a lot to take in," she said, pulling her hand away gently. "This town, Mr. Blackwell's death. It's all very overwhelming." "I understand," he said, his eyes full of sympathy. "But you're not alone in this, Felicity. I'll be here for you. You can count on that." Just as he spoke, a gunshot echoed through the night, coming from the direction of the saloon. Lucas was on his feet in an instant, his friendly demeanor gone, replaced by the hardened look of the lawman. "I have to go," he said, his hand already on his revolver. "Get back to the boarding house. Lock your door." He ran out into the street, disappearing into the darkness. Felicity sat there for a moment, her heart pounding. The gunshot had been a perfect interruption, ending their conversation right when she was starting to feel unnerved by his intensity. It was almost too convenient. She hurried back to Mrs. Peterson's, her mind racing. Back in her room, she didn't lock the door. Instead, she opened her worn carpet bag and retrieved the one thing her father had insisted she take with her. It was a small, heavy package wrapped in oilcloth. She carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small, pearl-handled derringer, fully loaded, and tucked beside it was a bundle of letters and a folded, hand-drawn map. These were not the papers of a mail-order bride. They were the papers of an heiress. The map showed the 50 acres of land surrounding Blackwell's mine. And the letters, written by her father, detailed a secret he had carried to his grave. Edmund Blackwell hadn't just been a stranger her father chose from a catalog. He had been her father's business partner. They had discovered the silver mine together. But Blackwell, the wealthier and more ruthless of the two, had cheated him, forging documents to take sole ownership and leaving her father with nothing but worthless shares and a mountain of debt. The mail-order bride arrangement wasn't a sale. It was an infiltration. A desperate, last-ditch plan for Felicity to get on the property, marry the man who had wronged them, and find a way to reclaim her family's stolen fortune. She wasn't a victim who had stumbled into a tragedy. She was an avenger, and she had just had dinner with the man she now suspected had murdered her target. Her entire world had been turned upside down twice in as many days. First, she was a desperate bride. Then a stranded, penniless woman. Now she was an heiress on a secret mission, and the man she was supposed to marry had been murdered before she could even meet him. And the town marshal, Lucas Lawson, was a walking, talking contradiction. He was her savior, her potential suitor, and she suspected a cold-blooded killer. The next few days were a blur of tension and careful observation. She worked diligently at the doctor's office, earning his praise and, more importantly, his trust. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch of the boarding house, and Lucas would often join her. He would talk about his day, about the town, but she noticed his questions always circled back to the same topics: Blackwell, the mine, and what she knew about her arrangement. She played the part of the naive, grateful woman, all while studying him, searching for cracks in his charming facade. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw when she mentioned Blackwell's business dealings. He was hiding something, and he was trying to figure out how much she knew. A week after her arrival, a lawyer from Tucson named Mr. Jenkins showed up at the boarding house. He was a thin, nervous man who smelled of dust and paper. He was the executor of Edmund Blackwell's estate. "Miss Woodrow," he began, peering at her through his spectacles, "I am here to inform you that Mr. Blackwell made a rather unusual provision in his will." Felicity's heart began to pound. Lucas was there, having conveniently shown up just moments after the lawyer arrived. He stood behind her, a protective hand on her shoulder. "A provision?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Indeed," Mr. Jenkins said, clearing his throat. "His will states that the silver mine and its operations are to be sold, with the proceeds going to a group of investors in San Francisco. However," he paused for dramatic effect, "the cabin and the surrounding 50 acres of land were bequeathed to his intended bride should he die before the marriage could take place." Felicity stared at him, feigning shock. "To me? But we never even met." "Nevertheless, the property is legally yours, should you choose to accept it." Lucas's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Miss Woodrow will need some time to consider this," he said, his voice smooth as silk. The lawyer nodded. "Of course. I will be in town for 3 days. You may inform me of your decision then." After Mr. Jenkins left, Felicity sank into a chair, the deed to the property clutched in her hand. "I own property," she whispered, looking up at Lucas. He knelt beside her, his face a mask of concern. "It appears you do, if you want it." "I don't know what to think," she said, playing her part. "It's so isolated out there. What would I do all alone?" "You don't have to decide tonight," he said, his voice a soothing balm. "Take your time." But that night, he returned to the boarding house after his rounds. He found her on the porch, staring out into the darkness. "Still wrestling with your decision?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded. "It's not a simple choice." "Felicity," he began, his tone growing serious. "There's something I need to tell you about Blackwell, something that might affect your decision." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "The mining accident. It wasn't an accident." She looked at him, her eyes wide with feigned surprise. "What do you mean?" "Blackwell had enemies," Lucas said, his expression grim. "He drove his workers hard. I believe the cave-in was deliberately caused. I believe he was murdered." He was finally admitting it. But he was twisting the narrative, setting himself up as the hero who was uncovering the truth. "I'm telling you this because if you accept that property, you might be putting yourself in danger, especially living out there alone. Whoever killed Blackwell might not want his heir taking possession." The threat was clear, wrapped in a package of concern. He was trying to frighten her. "But why would anyone care about the cabin?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The land," Lucas said, his eyes intense. "There are rumors that Blackwell had found another vein, not of silver, of gold. If that's true, that 50 acres could be worth a fortune. He was laying all his cards on the table, or so he thought. He was building a cage of fear around her, preparing to offer her the only key." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and strong. "Whatever you choose, Felicity, I will protect you." He let that promise sink in for a moment before he delivered the final, calculated blow. "There is another option, you know." "What's that?" she whispered. He turned to face her, his gaze locking with hers. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, a perfect, logical, terrifying conclusion to the trap he had been setting since the moment she arrived. "I know it's sudden," he said quickly, "but there's something between us. You feel it too. As my wife, you'd be safe. We could claim the property together. You wouldn't have to face this alone." He was offering her protection from a danger he himself had likely created. He wanted the land, the potential gold, and he needed her signature on the deed to get it. He probably thought that once they were married, a grieving, frightened little bride from Boston would be easy to control, or easy to dispose of. "Is that the only reason?" she asked, searching his face, testing him. "For my safety?" His expression softened. "No, Felicity. I've been alone a long time. I never expected to feel this way about anyone again. This offer comes from my heart." He was good. He was very, very good. And in that moment, Felicity knew exactly what she had to do. She had to walk into the cage. She had to accept his proposal. She had to become his wife. It was the only way to get close enough to find the proof she needed to destroy him. "Lucas," she said, her voice full of wonder and relief. "Yes, my answer is yes." The smile that broke across his face was one of pure triumph. He pulled her into his arms, and as his lips met hers, Felicity closed her eyes and prepared for war. The week leading up to the wedding was a master class in deception. Felicity played the part of the blushing bride-to-be, swept off her feet by the handsome town marshal. She allowed Mrs. Peterson to fuss over her, accepted the congratulations of the townspeople, and smiled sweetly at Lucas whenever he was near. But beneath the surface, she was a coiled spring of vigilance and calculation. Her mind was constantly working, analyzing his every word, his every action. She needed proof. Suspicions and gut feelings wouldn't be enough to take down a man like Lucas Lawson. He was the law in Silver Creek. His word was gospel. To accuse him would be to sign her own death warrant unless she had undeniable evidence. She started small. Using her position at the doctor's office, she went through all of his records again, this time looking for anything related to Lucas. She found it in the patient ledger. Lucas had been treated for a deep laceration on his right arm, just 2 days after Blackwell's accident. The notes said he'd tangled with a mountain cat on patrol. A mountain cat. Or a man fighting for his life with a geologist's pick. Defensive wounds. Blackwell had fought back. It was a piece of the puzzle, but not enough. The wedding day arrived, a bright, clear Sunday. The whole town turned out, packing the small church to the rafters. Felicity walked down the aisle alone, her eyes fixed on Lucas. He stood at the altar looking handsome and proud. As she took his hand, his skin felt cold. Or maybe it was just her. They recited their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her. It was a possessive, triumphant kiss, and the crowd cheered. Felicity felt a wave of nausea. She was now legally bound to her greatest enemy. After the ceremony, there was a celebration outside the church. As Lucas was distracted by well-wishers, Felicity saw a familiar face at the edge of the crowd. It was the tall, thin drunk who had accosted her on her first day, the one whose eyes had held a warning. His name was Jeb. He looked sober now, his face etched with worry. He caught her eye and gave a subtle jerk of his head toward the back of the general store. Making an excuse about needing some air, Felicity slipped away from the party. She found Jeb waiting for her in the alley. "You made a mistake, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "A real bad mistake." "What do you know about Marshal Lawson?" she asked, getting straight to the point. Jeb looked around nervously. "Me and the boys, we worked for Blackwell. He was a hard man, but he was fair. The day he died, he was going to expose Lawson. The marshal's been skimming from the mine's payroll for months, using a fake name to sign for ghost workers." The pieces clicked into place. It wasn't just about the potential gold on her land. It was about covering up a long-running theft. "Blackwell found out," Jeb continued. "He confronted Lawson at the mine. We heard him arguing. Blackwell was going to send for the U.S. Marshals. Then there was a boom. Lawson came out alone. He told everyone it was a tragic accident." "Why didn't you say anything?" Felicity demanded. A bitter look crossed Jeb's face. "And tell who?" "The man who just committed the murder. Lawson threatened us. Said if we breathed a word, we'd end up at the bottom of our own mine shaft. He ran the others out of town. I only stayed because I had nowhere else to go." He pressed a small folded piece of paper into her hand. "Blackwell gave me this that morning. Told me to hide it. It's a copy of the fake payroll ledger with his notes. It's proof. Gold." She now had proof. "Thank you, Jeb," she said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "You've been very brave." "Just be careful, Mrs. Lawson," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "You're sleeping in the lion's den now." That night, Lucas carried her over the threshold of his small house. It was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She forced a smile. "It's perfect, Lucas." Later, as they prepared for bed, he turned to her, his expression serious. "Felicity, I know this has all been very fast. I want you to know you have nothing to fear from me. I will be a good husband to you." He was a monster, but he was a convincing one. As she lay beside him in the darkness, pretending to sleep, her mind raced. She had the ledger. It was a start, but it was his word against a dead man's and a known drunk's. She needed more. She needed to find the money he had stolen, or correspondence, or something that tied him directly to the crime beyond any doubt. Her new home was not a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground. And she was the only hunter. She would have to search his house, his office, every corner of his life, all while playing the part of a loving, devoted wife. The slightest mistake, one moment of suspicion, and he would not hesitate to silence her, just as he had silenced Edmund Blackwell. The game had begun, and only one of them would be walking away from it. The days that followed were the most terrifying of Felicity's life. She lived a double life, a performance that required every ounce of her courage and cunning. By day, she was the dutiful wife of the town marshal, a respected figure in the community. She smiled, she cooked, she made their house a home. But by night, or in the precious few hours when Lucas was away on patrol, she became a spy in her own house. She searched his study, carefully examining every book, every drawer, every loose floorboard. She was looking for the stolen payroll money, or the real ledgers, or anything that would corroborate Jeb's story. She found nothing. Lucas was clever, meticulous. He wouldn't leave evidence lying around. Her search grew more desperate. One afternoon, while Lucas was settling a dispute at the saloon, she risked going to his office at the jailhouse. The building was small, just a single room with a desk and 2 cells at the back. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she let herself in with the key she had taken from Lucas's key ring. She went straight to his desk, her hands flying through his papers. She found reports, wanted posters, town ordinances. It was all maddeningly official, maddeningly clean. Then, tucked away in the back of the bottom drawer, she found a small locked metal box. It was heavy. It had to be it. But she had no key. Frantically, she looked around the office. Her eyes landed on a length of thick wire by the fireplace, used for cleaning the chimney. Her hands, shaking, she worked the wire into the lock, twisting and probing. The skills she had learned from her father's locksmithing hobby, one of the few useful things he'd ever taught her, came flooding back. After a tense minute that felt like an eternity, she heard a soft click. The box was open. She lifted the lid, her breath catching in her throat. Inside was not money. It was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon, and a woman's tintype photograph. The woman in the photo was beautiful, with dark hair and a sad smile. Felicity picked up the top letter. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. It began, "My dearest Lucas." It was signed, "Your loving wife, Lillian." Lillian, the wife he had told her died of typhoid fever. But these letters were postmarked from a sanitarium in Colorado, and the most recent one was dated only 6 months ago. Lillian wasn't dead, and the letters told a horrifying story. She was sick, yes, but not with typhoid. She had consumption, and Lucas hadn't been a grieving widower. He had abandoned her, sent her away to die alone while he came west to reinvent himself. He had been sending her just enough money to keep her at the sanitarium, but the letters were full of her pleas for him to come, her fears that he had forgotten her. "The doctors say I don't have much time," the last letter read. "I pray I will see your face one last time. I am so lonely, my love, and so very afraid." The stolen payroll money wasn't for greed. It was for a secret. He wasn't building a new life. He was running from an old one. He hadn't just murdered Blackwell to cover up theft. He had murdered him to protect a lie. Blackwell must have discovered the truth about Lillian, another piece of leverage he could use to expose Lucas as a fraud. The sound of footsteps on the boardwalk outside shocked her back to the present. It was Lucas. He was coming back. In a panic, she shoved the letters and the photo back in the box, snapped it shut, and slid it back into the drawer, pushing it to the very back. She had just managed to stand up and look busy straightening a stack of papers when the door opened. Lucas stepped inside, a frown on his face. "Felicity? What are you doing here?" "I just brought you some lunch," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she pointed to a small basket on the edge of the desk she hadn't even realized she'd grabbed on her way out of the house. "I was worried you'd forget to eat." He looked at her. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. For a heart-stopping moment, she was sure he knew. He glanced from her face to the desk, his gaze lingering on the bottom drawer. "That was thoughtful of you," he said finally, his voice unreadable. "But you shouldn't be here. It's not safe." He walked her to the door, his hand on the small of her back. It felt like a brand. "I'll see you at home for supper," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. As she walked back down the street, her legs trembling, she knew that something had shifted. He suspected her. The careful dance they had been doing was over. The hunter was now the hunted. He would be watching her every move. She had the proof she needed to ruin him, to expose him as a bigamist, a liar, a thief, and a murderer. But he knew she was looking, and he would do anything to keep his secrets buried. Her life was in more danger now than it had ever been. She had to get the evidence to someone, but who could she trust? Every face in town was a potential friend of the marshal. She was utterly alone, married to a man who would kill her without a second thought, and he was starting to suspect that his loving wife was not what she seemed. The clock was ticking. She had to make her move before he made his. The house was no longer a home. It was a pressure cooker. The air was thick with unspoken suspicion. Lucas watched her with an unnerving intensity, his charm replaced by a cold, calculating vigilance. He would ask casual questions about her day, about who she'd spoken to, but they felt like interrogations. He started coming home at odd hours, trying to catch her off guard. Felicity knew she was running out of time. She had to get the letters out of his office and into safe hands. The only person she could even remotely trust was Jeb. But contacting him was a huge risk. Lucas had eyes and ears all over town. She decided to use her work as a cover. She told Lucas that Dr. Wilson needed help organizing years of old records stored in the attic above the general store. It was a plausible lie. The attic was dusty, quiet, and most importantly, it had a small, grimy window that overlooked the alley behind the jailhouse. She spent 2 days hauling dusty boxes around, creating the illusion of work. On the 3rd day, she put her plan into action. She waited until she saw Lucas ride out of town on his afternoon patrol. Then she scribbled a hasty note to Jeb. "Jailhouse. Desk. Bottom drawer. Metal box. Get it. Bring it to the doctor's attic. Urgent." She wrapped the note around a small rock, went to the attic window, and threw it with all her might. It landed with a soft thud in the alley near the saloon, where Jeb spent most of his days. Now all she could do was wait and pray. An hour passed. Then another. The sun began to dip lower in the sky. Lucas would be back soon. Just as she was about to give up hope, she heard a faint scratching sound at the attic's back door, the one that opened onto an external staircase. It was Jeb. He slipped inside, his face pale and beaded with sweat. In his hands, he held the metal box. "The lock's busted," he whispered, "but it's all in here." "Thank you, Jeb," she breathed, taking the box from him. "You need to disappear. Get out of Silver Creek now. He'll know it was you." "Where will I go?" "Take this," she said, pressing the last of her own money into his hand. Go to Tucson. Find the U.S. Marshal's office. Tell them everything. Give them my name, Felicity Lawson. Tell them to come quickly. Jeb nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Godspeed, ma'am. He slipped out the door and was gone. Felicity hid the box under a pile of old canvases in the darkest corner of the attic. She was about to head back to the doctor's office when she heard the sound of heavy boots on the stairs. It wasn't Jeb. It was Lucas. She flattened herself behind a stack of crates, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. The door creaked open. Lucas stepped inside, his gun drawn. He scanned the dusty room, his eyes like chips of ice. Felicity? He called out, his voice deceptively calm. I know you're in here. Silence. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't see her. My office was broken into, he said, taking a slow step into the room. My desk was disturbed. A certain box is missing. A box you showed a great deal of interest in the other day. He knew. He knew everything. I just wanted to know the truth, Lucas, she said, her voice shaking as she rose from her hiding place. She had to buy time. For Jeb, for the U.S. Marshals. His face hardened, the charming mask falling away completely to reveal the monster beneath. The truth? He sneered. The truth is you're just like her. A lying, prying woman who couldn't leave well enough alone. Lillian? Felicity whispered. His eyes blazed with fury. Don't you say her name? She was a millstone around my neck, a sick, whining creature who was holding me back. I gave her a comfortable place to die, and still she complained. And Blackwell? Felicity pressed, taking a slow step backward. Did he find out about her? Blackwell was a greedy old fool. Lucas spat. He found one of my letters to the sanitarium, threatened to expose me, said a man with a secret wife couldn't be trusted as town marshal. He was going to ruin everything I've built here. He took another step toward her, a cruel smile twisting his lips. So I shut him up. A few well-placed charges in the mine, and my problem was solved. And now, he raised his gun, leveling it at her heart. I have to solve another one. You won't get away with this, she said, her back hitting the far wall. Jeb is gone. He's on his way to Tucson to tell the U.S. Marshals everything. Lucas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Jeb? The town drunk? You think they'll believe him? He's not going anywhere. I saw him sneaking around my office. I followed him here. He's taking a long nap at the bottom of the old well behind the saloon. No one will ever find him. The blood drained from Felicity's face. Jeb was dead. No one was coming to save her. She was alone with a killer, and the last person who could corroborate her story was gone forever. Lucas raised his pistol, his aim steady. It's a shame, Felicity. You're much smarter than I gave you credit for. We could have been happy together. No, a voice said from the shadows near the doorway. She couldn't. Dr. Wilson stepped into the room, holding an old, double-barreled shotgun. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. I heard shouting, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I came to see if Felicity was all right. Lucas stared at the doctor, his expression a mixture of shock and rage. Put the gun down, old man. This doesn't concern you. It does now, Dr. Wilson said. I heard every word. For a tense moment, no one moved. It was a standoff, the aging doctor versus the hardened killer. Then Lucas made his move. He shifted his aim from Felicity to the doctor, firing his revolver. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Dr. Wilson cried out and staggered back, clutching his shoulder, the shotgun clattering to the floor. Lucas turned back to Felicity, a triumphant sneer on his face. No more heroes! But in that split second, while his attention had been on the doctor, Felicity had lunged for the metal box. Her fingers closed around the only other thing inside it besides the letters, her father's derringer. She had slipped it into the box for safekeeping when she gave it to Jeb. Now, as Lucas turned back to her, she raised the small, pearl-handled pistol and fired. The shot was small, almost a pop compared to the roar of Lucas's Colt. But it was true. Lucas looked down in shock at the small, dark hole that had appeared in the center of his chest. He looked back up at Felicity, his eyes wide with disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a gurgle came out. Then he crumpled to the floor, his reign of terror over. Felicity rushed to Dr. Wilson's side. His wound was bloody, but it wasn't fatal. "You saved my life," she said, tears streaming down her face as she tore a strip from her petticoat to make a bandage. "We saved each other's," the doctor replied, his voice weak, but his eyes full of pride. Weeks later, the U.S. Marshals finally arrived from Tucson. They found a town in quiet shock and a woman who had faced down a monster and won. The investigation confirmed everything. They found Jeb's body in the well, and Lucas's letters exposed his web of lies. They also found Edmund Blackwell's original will, hidden in a safe in his office. It turned out that Blackwell, plagued by guilt over cheating his partner, had amended it. After his death, the entire mining operation, the cabin, the land, and all its assets were to go to his partner's only child, Felicity Woodrow. She was not just an heiress. She was the sole owner of the Silver Creek mine, one of the richest silver strikes in the Arizona Territory. She didn't flee. She stayed. She took control of her inheritance, running the mine with a fairness and integrity that earned her the respect of the workers and the town. She paid Dr. Wilson's medical bills and funded the construction of a new, proper doctor's office. She used her wealth to build the town's first school, and she served as its first teacher. She had come to Silver Creek as a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a mail-order bride sold to settle a debt, but she had refused to be a victim. She had untangled a web of lies, faced down a killer, and claimed the legacy that was rightfully hers. She had transformed a place of fear and deception into a community of hope and prosperity. Her journey was a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of landscapes, the strongest spirits can forge their own destiny. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the dark and mysterious corners of history.